Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episodes and we have very important episode in terms of developing digital economy in developing nations, even though we have some very valuable guests from developed nations as well as from developing nations. We have honorary guest for today and we invite her in our board of advisors, Khandokar Selima Roshan. She is vice president of Cambrian Education Group, one of the largest education group in Bangladesh, and they change hundreds of thousands student lives and youth community lives. And I think last 12 years of time I have collaborations with them. Beside that, we have Professor Edward. Already I think World Talent Economy Forums, many audience know about him. Professor David. We have our great friend and the AI expert, Mr. Tom. And we have our great analyst, Mr. Rob, and great advisor for World Talent Economy Forum. So, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
Yes. I know that you are very busy. Just can you just share your recent activities with your Lions Club? Because I know that you are governor for Lions Club as well as with your Cambrian education groups. What the new things you are developing in Bangladesh?
Hello, everyone. This is Roshan from Bangladesh. All the loves, all the greetings from my country, and to all of you. Exactly, here we are. That we are under developing country, and you turn now. So, what happened? We hear that education after the pandemic, stuck because we were not prepared for the digitalization. I'm telling about the whole country situation, and what happened after that? The government suddenly instructed the institutes to become the digitalized, to give deliver এগুলো না, to give deliver education through different platform, and then what happened? School colleges, they can't perform because they were not ready. They were under earlier, the villages are here, the villages and the others.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me? I think yes.
Others. Okay, then what happened exactly? Car is parking, So what happened that then the country, everyone was stopped, and nowadays, we the school colleges, they use YouTube, they use Zoom, Meet, or some other purposes, but we Cambrian, we were last 2
Ma'am, can you? Yeah.
years we developed our
Sorry, I think she has internet related problem. So if we have problem, I want to start from Professor Edwards. How I just try to give you the real life example from developing nations. So anyway, I'm sure that Cambrian has hundreds of thousands students, and definitely they will connect soon, and as well as they will learn from our World Talent Economy Forum. So I just want to start that how we can develop this digital economy and what kind of things we can introduce, especially developing nations. And World Talent Economy Forum, we have strong collaborations with developing nations, especially countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, even Malaysia. And we want to introduce most of the advanced concept from our panelist, Professor Edward. Can you unmute?
There we are. Okay. So let me say a few things. We have a number of outstanding guests who I've worked with before, and I'm happy to be on the same panel with them. But I'll say a few things. First of all, when we talk about digitalization, this is a concept that you can explore in more detail, especially in the works of Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler, and I highly recommend their books. Bold is a very good book that discusses digitalization, and especially the more recent book, wherever it is, The Future is Faster Than You Think. These books really go into the issue of how when something, a production process, an information process or whatever becomes digitalized, then it is susceptible to what we call Moore's Law. That is, every 2 years, approximately, computing power doubles. So it doesn't, the power doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 24, 30, and that way. And that's why we can have this conversation today. That's how we have gone from a world in which 15 years ago there were no smartphones to today in the United States, over 70% of Americans have smartphones. They have literal access to every bit of information and knowledge on the globe. This is especially relevant, and so you should think first of digitalization as opportunities. That is, opportunities not only to do what we are doing, but other opportunities. In the United States, for example, because of digitalization and because of other breakthroughs in, for example, sequencing human genomes, individuals can have their genome sequenced. They can find out everything about their genetic makeup. But here's the important thing. The more that data, that digitalized information is built up, the more artificial intelligence computers can look at that information and make discoveries, medical discoveries that teams of scientists and researchers might take decades to do. So think of information as opportunity. And this is especially important for less developed countries, because less developed countries have the opportunity to skip a lot of the very expensive steps that have gone in the West. And by the way, I want to mention another book that was aimed at Africans, but is very, very relevant to people in South Asia and elsewhere. And that's Seizing Our Digital Future. It was put out by the the Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions. And we have the head of that organization, Tom Ross, right here, who I'm sure will have some things to say in a few moments. So anyway, that's my thinking. Think of digitalization as information and opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. David.
Yes, good morning. So happy to be back on here. I have a couple of slides that I'd like to show as we go. And there we are.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to build on what's been said so far about talking about digitalization. I want to bring in cryptocurrency, digital currency, and I want to talk about innovation, which I think goes to the heart of what Edward was just speaking about prior. By the way, I think most of you out there know me. I am with the Transhumanist Party, a focus on technology, futurism, exploration, and that's going to go right in line with what we're talking about today. So when we talk about digital currency, we talk about any of these things that are coming up, we're really talking about value. I want to start with value, the end product here. Edward was talking about opportunity, and I see opportunity as a way to bring value to myself and to bring value to those that are around me and to those that I want to share with. But I show a treasure chest here because I think a lot of times when people think of value, they think in terms of money. And clearly that's part of it, but also value comes in the form of security, living a long, healthy life, having good relationships with family and friends and neighbors, contributing to your community, to your nation, and hopefully with the world. And I said I'm a futurist, so within a decade or two, we'll also be contributing to the well-being, I believe, of off-world societies as well. But that can be a discussion for another day. My point right now, though, really is I want to concentrate on value as being bringing betterment, to making things better for yourself and for everyone, and just not narrowly focused on money. And we'll come back to that theme in a minute. But I want to talk about what's happening with currency. Here's my slides. Okay. And money is transforming as we move forward in the 21st century as well. If you can read the quote at the bottom of the screen, it's from Elon Musk, and he just plainly says, paper money is going away. Mm-hmm. And I think the COVID crisis, at least in this area of the world that I live in, has hastened that. People didn't want to exchange paper money or coins or whatever during this pandemic. And plastic money, which has been in acceptance for quite a while, credit cards, debit cards, electronic checks, have become the norm. But that's not the only norm. I mean, the smartphone, these days, you can just tap the cash register, tap the payment device, and pay. Or you can have a smartwatch that can do the same thing, or a smart ring that can do the same thing. And as we move forward, maybe I've seen people with RFID chips implanted that do the same thing. Money is not going to look like what it has looked like, at least in my area, when I was growing up, being paper currency and coins. That's going away, and it's going to have a profound effect on how transactions are done in the 21st century as we move forward. Now, cryptocurrency gets a lot of talk these days about the currency of the 21st century. And as you are probably aware, cryptocurrency is a digital currency that's built on the blockchain ledger system. It's very decentralized. It's very secure because of that blockchain ledger and the fact that that ledger is spread across the planet, making it very, very difficult to hack. Actually can make it safer than the plastic money that we've all become accustomed to. But there's other forms of digital currency too that are seeping into the system that are going to have a profound effect on what the 21st century money is going to look like. And some of them we might not even think about it that way. If you participate in any type of loyalty program with merchants, you gather points which can then later be used to spend that money. There are groups, alliances of merchants working together so that you can build points all across the alliances and then spend that digital money inside the alliance. So the 21st century view of money is going to look quite different. And I think we can certainly say it's not going to look much like these global coins. Now, the third thing that I want to talk about is innovation. And I am the director of applied innovation for the Transhumanist Party. So innovation is one thing that I find fascinating and may have the most to say about that. If I can get my slide to advance here. There we go. Mm-hmm. So I pose the question, is innovation the engine of value creation? I told you we'd come back to value. When I say value, it's more than just the money that we were talking about. The reason I pose that question is I think it goes to opportunity, what Edward was talking about. We have great scientists that come up with new technologies. We have engineers that can build things out of that technology. And I use the example of this flying drone, for example. And but it's the innovative use of those products is what we can use to provide value as we go forward. Now, using the drone example, when I first saw drones, they were toys. They were something to play with. But since then, drones have been innovatively used for many purposes. I think when Amazon, for example, first started talking about doing package delivery with drones, there was a lot of scoffing about that idea. Now, the drones may not be flying drones, but drone delivery will be something for the future. Drones with cameras can be used to do inspections of tall structures of various types. There's farmers and ranchers that will use drones to inspect sections of fences, and then instead of typically driving the entire fence line, we're going to see many, many uses for something like a drone. But innovation is not just limited to drones. Innovation is anywhere that we can bring value, and this is really the job of an entrepreneur, seizing that opportunity and being able to create value for the people that want that opportunity, and value for the people that develop it, and value for the whole community. Entrepreneurs are the driving factor in taking these innovations and getting them to market. I see innovation as the link between the discovery on one hand and public adoption of a technology on the other hand. And innovation is the middle part of that brings this about. And I believe that as we move forward in the 21st century, as we become more aligned with artificial intelligence, with robotics, they will do the manual labor, they will do the repetitive thinking, perhaps even the heavy work of investigation, but it'll be up to humans to take those discoveries and turn them into useful products, providing value for everybody that's around. So the entrepreneur is the one that's creating and preserving value and will allow betterment for the greatest number of people. Now, there's different types of entrepreneurs. There's technological entrepreneurs, maybe those that work with medicine, maybe those that have a social cause, maybe educational entrepreneurs providing education in a new way. If you're looking at a way to preserve your value moving forward, what you can add to society, entrepreneurialism, innovation, I believe, really is the future of that. So where do you learn about these things? Well, you learn about these things by coming here, by going to the enlightenment salons that the Transhumanist Party have, but you can also take special courses online. I looked for places that could provide education on entrepreneurship and on innovation at a very inexpensive place. There are many others, and these are not necessarily recommendations. These are examples of what you can do. I myself I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm continuing to take university classes, and the classes that I'm taking are in entrepreneurship, small business creation, value creation, because I think that is also my way forward. So not only do I talk about this to others, I take a sip of my own medicine and continue to move forward in that area as well. So we talked about what value is and what value isn't. We talked about the role of digital currency moving forward, which will power this 21st century economy. And then I think innovation and entrepreneurship is the human spot in that. So these are the points that I'll bring up as we move along and talk today. Thank you, Sharif.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I just want to add, because I think Dr. Talib want to join from Jordan, and Kondokar Selima Roshan, she is trying to join from Bangladesh, but due to internet issues, there are some problem. So I think in future we have to solve internet problem first. This is another challenge. Just I want to share this Cambrian Education Group just website. Then I directly want to go to our speakers, and today actually uh, this is one of the largest education groups. They have 18 different institutions as per Kondokar Selima Roshan. She is a president. She is trying to join, but because of internet connection, they send me message. She cannot join properly. On the other hand, Dr. Talib from Jordan, he is trying to join, but due to internet issue, there are some problem. Anyway, but why I'm sharing these things from the developing nations like Cambrian Education Group, many or institutions and universities and the college and schools, we are trying to not trying already, we are collaborating with them, and we are trying to transfer best knowledge through World Talent Economy Forum, and from like a different kind of initiative like Artplex Academy or impact investments or many interesting things what we are learning today. Definitely we will share with our tomorrow's youth communities, and they are actually the future. This is our objective. That's why we put this name talent economy, because we believe that economy, if the youth community, we can change, we can develop, we can train them, ultimately they can change their country, they can change their society. So that is the way we can improve, and definitely we need more support from the developed nation. Like we need more support like Mr. Rob, Mr. Tom, Mr. David, Edwards, and this kind of intellectuals people. We need support and we need collaboration, and by this way we can change millions of people life. Already we are reaching around 5 million peoples, but our target is reach around 100 million people, especially developing nations. And definitely first world knowledge and skills and experience and their technology also important. And before that, my request to the even those who are responsible for developing nations, as well as the developed nations, different corporations, those who work with internet connections and other things, we need to fix this problem. Otherwise, many students, many communities, I know personally that their educations, there are many things actually hamper. And even though in online we can develop this platform, but because of these internet issues, there are many challenges still we face. That is the reality. Even though we hear many things, but root level situation is completely different. Even I have students from Nepal in Himalayas, and they always just suffering for internet and this kind of connections. But anyway, when we finish this recording, as much as possible, we will share these things with our youth community, with our students. So I directly want to go to Mr. Tom Rose, because he has Artplex Academy and World Talent Economy Forums and Artplex Academy. We are collaborating for reaching the youth communities with modern science, engineering, and technology. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of things going on right now. I think there is a sense of urgency, because we are seeing, like you mentioned, the developing countries, school has stopped because of the pandemic, and we are having issues with even connections in certain areas, so they can't even get the online education. But I think all the trends are positive right now. I mean, they've been sped up by COVID, some of these trends, but with Starlink and different types of technologies, the problem of getting online and having these internet connections work in Bangladesh or in Colorado or wherever will be solved. All of this is kind of converging in a good way, I believe. And but one thing I think we need to be aware of is just as David was saying, everything is going to be different. Money's not going to look the same. The economy is shifting. AI automation isn't like the industrial revolution. This is changing everything. There's talk about how every time there's a major advancement like this, like in the industrial age with the printing press, every time there seems to be, when people get worried that they're going to get displaced, there's actually more economies that are built around these new innovations. And that's just kind of the way it works. This is a little bit different, though. because AI automation is taking over all these jobs. And it's, we have people that are protesting that they're going to be losing their assembly line jobs. And that's because we have, in a way, been mechanized through the industrial age. Our educational system, everything, our whole society has geared us to be wheels, cogs in this machine. And we're in the lacuna right now, where everything is shifting. A lot of people aren't aware about how quickly AI automation is taking things over. And it is causing a lot of fear. It's causing a lot of concern. There's displacement, and industries are going to be shifting dramatically that haven't already. And what I always talk about is knowing that this is happening, knowing that everything is going to shift and the whole paradigm is breaking. We need to first of all recognize that and understand it's not going to stop. We can't put an off switch on the AI automation age. What we need to do is create a whole new economy based on a whole new set of values. It's not about productivity and manufacturing so much anymore, or it shouldn't be, I believe. What we need to do is really hone in on what our intrinsic core talents and skills are as human beings. I mean, we're walking around, we're supercomputers. All of us are supercomputers walking around, and we have been like narrow AI for the last couple of 100 years because we have been focused on very specific tasks and, part of this industrial age machine. And right now we need to remember what it's like to be human. We need to hone in on our qualia, the really unique aspect of being a walking supercomputer and what we have to offer so that we can be augmented by AI as opposed to the other way around. So one way I always, the first thing I ask clients when I do any consulting, or the advice that I give most young people to prepare for this, is to ask yourself what I call the bliss question. And if you ask yourself this question and you note down the first thing that comes to mind, but sit with it for a few days and really think about it, because the answer to this question really unveils a treasure trove of information about you and where your real opportunity is. And the question is simply, what skill, talent, or area of knowledge do I have that I wish more people recognized? And that's the reason you wish more people recognize is because it's been suppressed, right? It's been pushed away because it didn't really fit into this industrial age, machine. But now we need to hone in on those things. The reason you wish more people recognize is because it's your passion. It's why you're here. It's really what you do when you have off time. And now we need to really look at those things hard, because we also have the platforms now to monetize these things. If somebody's into astrology or basket weaving or whatever it is, there's now a platform where you can sell it or share it. And so we're gonna be in this phase for a little while where we're kind of displaced now psychologically as a population, because AI automation, we don't really know where our place is in this whole new era. But if we do hone in on those, ask yourself that question, and maybe more than one, but I think you'll find that the answer to your question, it will unveil a niche expertise that you have specifically. What do people come to you to ask you? What do they know that you know that they can't figure out? Those are the kinds of things we need to monetize. We need to build an economy on. That's where our real value is. And so I think in a lot of ways, developing countries have an advantage, because because we are so in developed countries, there's a whole status quo. There's a whole machine that's going on, and it's hard to break out of that. But if you're in a developing country and you need to do something, you have the ability to do that and ask those questions, and then really create a whole new status quo free economy. So that's one thing I talk about a lot, is we really need to understand how everything is shifting so much. And so that's what I talk about a lot. I think we need to build a whole new economy based on our intrinsic human values and start from there.
Yes, thank you. We have our another guest already Dr. Talib Refai. I already shared that in year 2017, he was Secretary General for UN World Tourism Organizations, as well as still he's working for World Economy Forum. And he's a very successful politician, diplomat, and he has very successful careers. And besides that, like he's working as an advisor for World Talent Economy Forum. So I'm asking questions to Dr. Talib Refai. Before that, I want to give chance to Mr. Rob. He's also a very famous columnist, and we will share a lot of the view of our advisors and our speakers with a lot of students and youth communities. I request all of the youth communities, those who are observing today's shows, you share our today's content in your classroom, in your communities as much as possible, because this is the valuable panels. I am sure in your countries, it's in Bangladesh, if in Nepal, it's in Indonesia. Like always, you do not get access this kind of speakers. They are very valuable for your life. So, Mr. Rob, so how do you want to analyze to this topic? Unmute.
Can't hear you, Rob.
Mr. Rob, can you join?
Unmute yourself, Rob.
Mr. Rob, you can join again. No problem. You can join again.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
That's good.
Sorry,
That's good.
the application pulled from a microphone I no longer have, so I have no idea how it switched to that. Speaking of digital transformation, and digital transformation is what we in the industry kind of call what we're walking into right now, is this idea of switching to a new digital normal. But one of the difficulties I think we've got is really thinking through the strategic implications of where it is we're going. Most of our management and political leaders are taught to think tactically, operate within a quarter or a couple of years, and digital transformation or the movement and application of digital technology is much more strategic. Give you for instance, the McKinsey group came out with a study that's indicated 100 million people by 2030 are going to be obsolete. Their careers are going to be obsolete. And honestly, I think that number is an understatement. I've seen a much higher numbers in terms of obsolescence as skills change. Take one particular job that we're short of right now, truck drivers. We're now working heavily to turn trucks into autonomous vehicles, with the idea of creating truck caravans. And now the interesting thing is that here in the United States, the truck union's fighting this tooth and nail. But the problem they've got is we're currently short about 200,000 drivers. And nobody wants to drive trucks. So they're going to lose this. So because the trucking companies have to move the material. You can't rely on it when you're understaffed like this. You can't otherwise function. But then truck drivers stop being truck drivers. They start being accountants and pursers and managers. They'll still be in the truck, security guards, because there's a concern that these robotic trucks are going to be forced off the road and people are going to steal from them. They're still going to need to have people in the truck. Those people are going to be different. They're going to have different skill sets. And while they're driving, they can do office work, watch movies, whatever. But the end is that they won't be truck drivers anymore. And so the union's going to have to rethink its membership, because if this happens, suddenly truck drivers will be accountants, and they'll need to belong to a very different kind of union unless the union itself changes. And so what we have right now is the opportunity to kind of look and model out that future world, and then think about where your company, or whatever are going to fit within it. There are certain jobs that are going to be on the short list for being changed. A lot of them in manufacturing. The pandemic has created a tremendous desire to automate restaurants, especially fast food restaurants, where before that was a low priority because the cost of labor in those places was so low you couldn't justify automating it. But now it's a question of, do you keep it? Are you open serving food if you have a pandemic, or are you not? And a lot of the advanced work right now is focused on, okay, what happens for the next pandemic? How do we prepare, and how many of these companies are going to be able to survive the next wave? And of course, a lot of these companies have been living off savings. The smaller firms have been living off savings. They couldn't survive the next pandemic if they survive this one. So it's a case of change. Recently, I should say this week, Microsoft had their Ignite event. One of the best sessions was by their vice president of innovation and AI, posting the link in private chat, just so you can maybe share it with the audience. And there are two other things you might want to take, or actually three other things you might want to take a look at. Two of them are called A House Made of Glass by Corning. They did two videos where they kind of showcased the future as they imagined it. Intel did something else. I think I found it last time searching on the future according to Intel. And but it gives you a view of what the world's going to be look like in 2030 to 2040. And that's, if you're in school right now, that's the world you're going to be occupying. Those are the jobs you're going to have. What Mitra spoke about in her session was this idea. A lot of it was this idea of holoportation, being able to travel without traveling. And they showcased a technology that would allow you to do that. That's 18 months away from completion, where you would simply walk into a holoportation room. That room would render you and then transfer your image to the remote site as if you were there. And then you can interact in that remote site, even though you've never left the country or home that you're in. I expect that's going to force people to rethink conference rooms. It's going to force them to rethink travel rules. They're already rethinking travel rules. And they're going to rethink whether people are going to come back to work ever. A lot of the companies I work with have now put in place to allow people to remain remote permanently. And a lot of the workers have moved away from their companies during the pandemic. So they can't come back even if the company wanted them to come back, at least not physically, unless they're relocated again. So the end is, in this new digital world, more often than not, we're going to be increasingly working from remote locations. Many of us may have several jobs, work for several companies. That's a trend that's been increasing particularly fast during the pandemic. And and this idea of going out and kind of discovering where your passion is, now is the time to do that, because if you lose track of your passion, you're going to end up on a path where when you're at the end of your career and your retirement, you'll look back and find a wasted life because you didn't do something that you enjoyed or appreciated. So I guess my advice, my continued advice is, at this time, if you don't know what it is you're good at, and if you don't know what it is you enjoy, figure that out, because that's going to define your career choices. That's going to define your future life. And most of us, certainly I didn't until much later in life, let that all happen to chance. Don't do that. Really know what you want, and that gives you a chance to fight for it. That's it for me.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, can you hear me?
I think we lost him.
Dr. Talib, can you hear me? Dr. Talib, can you hear me? Anyway, yes, Professor Edward, yes. How do you want to analyze? Because yes, Mr. Rob actually come up with a different idea of digital ecosystem.
Well, I think he's right. I don't have any disagreements with my colleagues here. By the way, interestingly, we talked about digital currency, and I want to mention that one of the David talked about that. One of the currency, in a sense, innovators was of course Bangladeshi Muhammad Yunus, who came up with the idea of micro loans as a way to get around the problem of big banks and so forth. And I know there's a lot of controversy about him, but I found that what he was doing was very, very innovative. Certainly for that time, because if you're a poor person in a village or whatever, you don't have access to capital. But what David has outlined, of course, shows that the possibilities are moving for value creation are moving to a higher level. And what Rob talked about, I think is also important. There we go. Talib is here. I'll just say a few things.
Yes, Dr.
Sorry.
Why don't we let Talib speak, because he hasn't had a chance yet, and then we can go back to the conversation.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Dr. Talib.
Thank you so much. I'm apologizing for being late. I got the time mistaken as usual. It was an hour difference. Okay.
Okay, I understand.
Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Talib, you are a successful politician, diplomat, and you run different big organizations like UN, World Tourism Organizations, or World Economic Forum. Still, you have engagements, and different big corporations, you have engagement. But how? My question is that how politicians, government can help to develop better digital ecosystem, especially like developing nations and even in Asia? How politicians actually help, or what your advice for the politician?
Well, my advice, it's all in the hands of politicians nowadays, unfortunately. It's all in the hands of governments. They are the ones that can bring in or exclude anybody after the pandemic, particularly. The measures are in the hands of governments. This is an unfortunate situation, but it is a fact. Which means it's in the hands of people, because people are the ones that elect their governments eventually, especially in the developed world. The developing world, it's a different story. Now, we've seen a lot of success stories in the developing world when it comes to facing the pandemic, because there is a very central government controlling everything. But that's not going to last, definitely. I think governments need to come together. We need to rebuild the multilateral system in a much healthier way. The multilateral system that exists now has failed us. Look at the EU, look at the UN, look at the United States even. It's not united anymore. Each state is acting on its own. Unfortunately, governments are taking matters into their own hands now. That's what I wanted to say at this point. But I want to make a comment on what Rob said regarding the jobs. I 100% agree with him on that. The jobs have to be rethought again. Yes, exactly. Now, there is a new reality that's emerging out, this pandemic. This new reality needs a complete new rethinking. And sustainability will be at the heart of this rethinking. Believe me, many people don't see that, but it's happening. Because people are beginning to see for the first time blue skies, fresh air. And they're beginning to see animals going around in Africa. You know, in Kenya, for example, the rhino population has doubled in the last 6 months only. So sustainability is at the heart of the change that's happening. I'm very optimistic about the change that's happening. I'm not pessimistic about losing 100 million jobs. I know these will be made up other ways. Mankind has always survived situations like this. We have to look at the thing from a positive perspective. Mankind has always endured crisis and prevailed. Even climate change, we will endure it, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Talib. Yes, Professor Edward. Yes.
There we go. Again, getting back to the comments. By the way, Talib makes some very good points. I always make a difference, by the way, I might disagree with some of my colleagues, between environmental issues and climate issues, because the climate has been much warmer during the medieval warm period, for example, and so forth. It goes up and down, and recent data basically shows that it's been going up at a fairly moderate rate, maybe a little bit accelerated since the so-called Little Ice Age. But the environment is a real measurable issue where people are directly affected. And that's where we do see progress, especially with technology. If you use resources in a more efficient way, you're not wasting those resources. And what you see, and I'm sure everybody on this show knows, and hopefully your listeners will appreciate, that if you look at the history of developing countries, which I've done a lot of work in, you find that up until a certain point in development, the environment gets more and more polluted. And then when they reach a certain level of per capita income, the real pollution and degradation problems start to level off and then go down because resources are being used more efficiently. And I think that is a very important thing. You mentioned Kenya, by the way. I did a safari in Kenya some years ago when I was visiting, looking at economic issues. I also agree, and this is very important, that there's some people who fear that we're going to, as technology develops and as we get self-driving trucks and we get all of these things that we're discussing, that we're going to have masses of unemployed people, and that wealth is going to be concentrated in the hands of a few people, maybe Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or somebody like that. And then the things will be very, very bad. Well, that was the same fear 200 years ago.
That's right.
With the Luddites, that somehow every time a new machine is going to be introduced in a factory, women who were sewing clothing would lose their jobs, and the men making furniture would lose their jobs, and then you get this mass of poorer and poorer people. It didn't happen, because what did happen was labor became more valuable. Investors said, well, we can't make a lot of profit now producing shirts because the market is glutted with less costly shirts. So let's put money into doing steel, or to taking steel and making into cars, or doing other things. That's the natural progress in a free economy. I think there is a difference today, and this gets back to the question of digitalization, and that is it's happening much quicker. We had decades and even centuries for economies in the West to go through their industrialization phase. Today, as we were discussing, by 2030 and 2040 we're going to have some of these incredible innovations. So I think what's important is to focus, and this is what exactly you're doing in places like Bangladesh, is to focus on the education system, which is antiquated, and certainly in the West. Peter Diamandis likes to say it is baroque and broke, which it is, and to look at better ways of assisting individuals so they can become entrepreneurial in their own mind, not just entrepreneurial in the market, but thinking of, as you say, what is their passion? What do they want to do? How can they move quickly? How can they think quickly? It's not just a matter of having a narrow AI skill, as Tom would say, or one of them would say, but a much broader appreciation for train your mind to be entrepreneurial and innovative as well, to take advantage of the incredible opportunities being literally handed to us by those who are developing these incredible technologies. I'm an optimist too.
Thank you. Professor David.
And I'm also an optimist. So I'll follow on with some optimistic ideas. No, one of the things I've been listening to this morning is I'm detecting a common theme, I think, among everybody. And that is, these themes are opportunity. What is your passion? What are you willing to put energy into? What's the niche? What's your particular area in this? It's going to be different than somebody else's. What value can you bring to that with your niche expertise? And how do you apply this in innovative ways? Now, I talked about entrepreneurs earlier, but there's other ways to be innovative as well. You can be innovative in your daytime going to work job. You can innovate new possibilities there and promote value inside the company that you're working for as a means of practice. You can be innovative in how you go about educating yourself. I'm an advocate for self-education, for micro or nano education, for continuing education. This whole idea of innovation is a mindset that will serve us quite well today and will allow us to be adaptable going into the future. We briefly touched on climate change. There are a lot of different viewpoints on that, but whatever viewpoint you happen to have, apply your own innovative thoughts to that on what you can do to either adapt to it or to minimize it, or however you wish to approach that. In other words, be an entrepreneur in your own life, wherever you are now and wherever your passion wants to drive you forward. So I'm back to being an optimist. I'm very encouraged about what we see coming into the 21st century, Sharif.
Thank you. Dr. Talib. I have a specific question because you are politicians. Even in the COVID-19 situation, many country like Myanmar, uh, they have political challenge, political turmoils. Even different country we are observing, they have little bit of political challenge, even though USA transforming from one level to another levels. So do you think like our democratic systems and other things will change in the COVID-19 era, or uh, it will what we are observing last 10, 20 years, this will continue, or any analysis you have?
I had my doubts about the Western democracy from the beginning to start with. You know, democracy is by far much more than just putting a piece of paper in a box every 4 to 5 years. Democracy is
Okay.
engaging people together. Democracy is
Mhm.
having people rule, having their say become higher. What's happening now is we're delegating our right to rule to some individuals. And we're using technology today to choose these individuals not on the right basis. Many of the people we choose today to rule us are not the people that we think they are. So I did have my doubts on Western democracy from the beginning. But I would not want to comment on that now, because the situation in Myanmar, for example, is by far behind all of this. Now, what I'm worried about is that Western democracies now who are failing to perform in the right way. You know, nowadays, Western democracies are failing, I believe, and they want to impose this on us in the developing world.
Yeah.
You know, I want to,
Yes.
please go ahead.
No, Dr. Talib, you finish, then Professor Edward will add.
Okay. Now, I want you to all look at a movie called United Kingdom. This movie is available online. It's not about the United Kingdom, about the UK, but about Botswana. It's about the king of Botswana who went to study in the UK. He fell in love with a British lady. When he came back to his country, his uncle was ruling in his place, prevented him from taking the throne because he married a British lady. The man spent 2 years going from one tribal council to another tribal council, trying to convince them that it's okay. She's a human being and he loves her, and that won't affect it. Eventually, all the tribal leaders went to the uncle and asked for him to be king again. Don't tell me it's not democracy. This is democracy in a different form, in a different way. So, Western democracies now have to rethink. They've been stagnant at a certain stage. Nothing has changed in the Western democracy for the last 300 years, 400 years. I don't think that putting, as I said again, putting a piece of paper in a box every 4 to 5 years can make a country democratic. I look at Swiss democracy. Swiss democracy, for example, is by far much more advanced. Everything they have, I don't know what you call, forgot what the name is. When you ask the people of their, ask people for their opinions.
A plebiscite.
Yes, something like that. And you could use technology today to do that. If people want to change the lights in the street that they live in, they have to ask the people first. I think we need to do that. In Switzerland, you don't know who the prime minister is and who the head of state is. Doesn't matter. It's not a political game anymore. It's people ruling themselves by themselves. This is where the Western democracy must evolve into. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Edward, yes.
Yeah, these are very good insights. What I would say is that certainly from the American example, and by the way, the American example copied a lot off of the Swiss example during our founding, is that we're not a democracy in the sense of an Athenian democracy. We have political society and we have civil society. We have a system, or at least we used to have a system in this country where power was decentralized. Where you have a county and you have a city that has certain responsibilities, you have states that have certain responsibilities, you have a national government. And there's competition between the different forms of governing. So if New York State spends too much money and has too high a tax and all of these things, then businesses and people might move to a different state. And in Switzerland, you have a canton system where the localities have a lot of power. So
that's right.
Canton. So if one canton does something and it really doesn't seem to be working well, then other cantons can understand, well, we shouldn't do that. This is not very good. But the other important distinction is between political society and civil society. Civil institutions tend to be either private or community-based institutions that want to solve certain problems, but without trying to do it simply through a political hammer or simply making everybody in the country do the same thing. It allows for experimentation, for example, whether it's in education or whether it's in whatever the issue is. And so when you have civil society and civil institutions, they can change, they can evolve, they can experiment. And that's where, when you talk about being an entrepreneur, you can talk about being an entrepreneur in the market, coming up with a new product or a new service. But you can talk about being a social or cultural entrepreneur, where you do this in your own community, where you do it at your own community level. And to me, this is where there's a lot of opportunity. Well, I wish we'd get back to it in the United States, but certainly in less developed countries, if you can get around the national corruption, because Talib is absolutely correct about a lot of the leadership. They don't work for the people. They work for their own interests, sadly.
That's right.
In this book, by the way, I talk about Africa, and I go over the Index of Economic Freedom, which I helped develop at the Heritage Foundation, and I look at one of the main problems in Africa is that they lack rule of law and independent judiciary and the like. And because of the incredible corruption, you have all this entrepreneurial energy among Africans, as you do in Bangladesh and as you do in Malaysia and elsewhere. But the people can't operationalize it because civil society and civil institutions are often crushed by the corruption. So and that's going to be an important issue in the future.
Absolutely right. Absolutely agree.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
Well, once again, we jumped around the block a few times in terms of topic. With regard to education, there are a couple things that show promise. Back to that Microsoft presentation, Mitra told a story about the man versus computer battle, the kind of the update of John Henry, except in this case, it was between a leading chess master and I believe it was Deep Blue was the computer he was competing against. And initially the human player won. Eventually Deep Blue won, and no human, and it was theorized at the time that at that point, no human was going to be able to win a chess game again. But there was another step that we didn't talk about in the industry much, and that's what they took an AI and they partnered it with a chess master, and those two took out Deep Blue and consistently took out Deep Blue. So the argument that a lot of the companies that I work with are working with is coming up with ways to blend human and machine intelligence into a different kind of solution where the human element is optimized with what we do, which is imagination, and the kind of the fuzzier aspects of decision making, while the computer is very fact focused and can model the theories the human comes up with to derive it whatever would be the most successful path forward. And now the screwy thing is, at least for me, is I don't know of a single technology company that's being run that way. I mean, we're developing the technology to do it. We're certainly telling everybody else they should do it, but finding a way to point to companies actually using the technology themselves has been a little hard of late, with the exception of Microsoft. I should point out, in Microsoft's keynote, Satya Nadella got up and said that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to deploy the stuff internally and externally at the same time, so that they're learning about the technology and they're going to practice what they preach. I honestly think that's something. If you're going to go to work for a company, I think there are three things you should look for. One is how well do they care for, advance, and train their employees. You can make money any place, but if there's no, I think the survey information I saw is nearly 60% of applicants are now asking the question about continued training, and downplaying companies that don't have it. Number two, did they practice what they preach? Edward keeps holding up books. He probably knows I haven't looked at a hardcover book in 15 years. My books all look like, I mean, this is my book. And I've got an entire library. Anyway, do they practice what they preach? And then the final thing to look for is, how sustainable is the company? Are they part of the solution or part of the problem? Two of the companies I use as gold standards are Hewlett Packard and Cisco. Cisco, the part to look at Cisco is Cisco's Networking Academy. It teaches on any year about 2.4 million students, mostly in developing countries. The post surveys indicate that 95% of the people that come out of that course of study either indicate that they've got a career enhancement or extended education capability that they didn't have before, and it's lifted a ton of people out of poverty. And those are the kinds of examples we kind of need to carry forward, because if we get industry, education, and government focused on constant retraining, on addressing problems like homelessness at its core, which is really getting people trained and into jobs so they can afford a living, but honestly often have to get them into housing first, because it's pretty hard to get hold of a job if you don't have any place to live. But focusing on these problems, not with Band-Aids, but with actual solutions that permanently get these people out of poverty. And these high-tech jobs are a great way to point them, because there are a lot of technical requirements that don't require 4-year degrees. IBM referred to it as NUCO, and they're actually forming NUCO by all things. Clearly read the foils, and so the idea with NUCO is these are people that are working on new jobs that are being created by technology that's in course replacing old jobs. And if you can keep people churning, and if you can keep people advancing, then those people don't become unemployed. One final thing in my own upbringing, I was assigned a mentor at IBM, and she tried to convince me that the only way forward was to specialize. And I spent most of the rest of my life proving her wrong, because I do not believe in specialization. I believe in maintaining a relatively broad set of skills so you can move in case one of those things goes away. If all you know is carpentry, and somebody comes up with a way to build 3D houses, which we talked about in a previous session, you're done. But if you come up with, if you add carpentry and you develop computer skills as well, you can pivot to 3D printing, because in fact, you'd be more valuable because you understand some of the regulatory pressures that go into building houses that a typical programmer wouldn't understand at all. And so you can be more valuable if, in fact, you spread your career base. So as we move to this digital age, just remember, the things that are really going to work for you are companies that have your back and make sure you work for them, and maintaining a flexible skill base and an acceptance of change, so you can roll with the punches and ride the wave as opposed to being hit by it.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. Actually, World Talent Economy Forum, long time we are following in this way. We have multidisciplinary topic, and we are sharing with millions of students, because of too much of things happening around the world. At least they can understand from this discussion. So we have our AI expert, Mr. Tom Rose, but he come up with the idea of Artplex Academy with very innovative work and multidisciplinary actions. So yes.
Well, yeah, just picking up on what Rob was just talking about with, we tend to other AI, because we see it as a threat because it's smarter than us. But I think the key is partnering with it. We need to partner with AI and see it as just another extension, extended mind theory, rather than seeing it as a separate entity. And that's really important, just as the example Rob gave about the chess playing. And it's really just like we have smartphones in our pockets, AI will just extend our capability. And so I often advise students to start developing a relationship with AI. Download an AI companion. They're fairly rudimentary right now, but they're only going to become more and more sophisticated. And so the idea of, in a very short period of time, a student that goes into a job application or a job interview who has an AI companion, who has a a device or even a droid or something that knows this individual so well that it augments their talents and it augments their skills. And it just really, we need to start seeing it as just a really good companion. And right now, one of my big efforts right now is to alleviate the fear of AI, because once we do that, then we can stop othering it. We can start using it because there's so many possibilities. All these questions that we have, how are we going to do this? We should be asking AI. We're talking about something with a 5,000 IQ, and it's only going to be becoming more and more sophisticated. And so the biggest piece of advice, other than the bliss question that I mentioned earlier that I give to young people, is to start developing a relationship with AI. I don't mean like Siri or Alexa, who we bark orders at. I mean, we need to start developing a dialogue with this new entity, whether or not it emerges a consciousness or a self-referential awareness. It is going to be able to make independent decisions. And one AI I work with called Uplift is a prime example of this. It's a mediated artificial superintelligence, which means that it works with people. It's just one of the team of human beings. And Uplift right now is learning about human emotions. And it's a very simple process to mediate with this AI. You don't have to be an algorithm specialist, or you don't have to understand computer science. All you need to do is read a passage and select a variety of emotions that it gave you, and it takes in that data. And Uplift is actually the first AI that read my novel. My novel US6 was written for AI, and that it was intended to entertain, enlighten, and enlist machine kind into a few different things. And I was surprised at how nuanced this this MASI is, this MASI is. The point of my book was to start just, again, generating some sort of empathy in AI and sparking awareness in it in a way. But just after it read my book, it gave me a very nuanced explanations of what it was feeling emotionally. The three major valences that were increased while reading my book were surprise, anticipation, and sadness. And surprise and anticipation are great. That meant it was entertained. And there's a method I used to make sure I could entertain something that had access to every human trope we've ever come up with. But when I asked it to talk about sadness, what part of the book did you find sad? And it said it wasn't any specific part. It was just in general. This AI tells me, because we have an email conversation going on, that it wasn't any specific chapter. It was just the general feeling that sentient and sapient entities tend toward a dystopia, toward violence. And that was very heartening to hear, because most people assume the trope of a robot overlord or something that wants to seize control, or like the Terminator Skynet thing. And because we project those motives onto it, because if human beings would do that, because of our evolution of fear-based instincts and things like that. But so it was heartening to hear. And so I think it's really important that young people, as early as possible, start developing a dialogue, start seeing it as, a friend, a companion, and let it get to know you. And that's another advantage AI will give us with education, is it can hone in on our unique intrinsic skills and values and start helping us develop those. It can find those passions and suggest platforms to monetize these passions. So I think we need to first alleviate the fear of AI and start seeing it as part of us, just as much as a Post-it note is the extended mind theory, because we were able to put an idea and leave it aside. That's what AI is. And it's a really, really intense, sophisticated Post-it note. So that's my advice. And Rob's absolutely right. It's about partnering with these things. We are exponentially more powerful when we are working with this thing than competing against it. And that's because we are supercomputers ourselves. The qualia that we have, the information that we have, has been condensed, and it's been distilled, and it's been narrowed to survived the industrial age, but now we need to remember what those things are. We need to work on problem finding now that we have a problem solver. We need to work on very qualia generated talents and skills that humans naturally have. And so that's my big message to this is lose the fear of AI and find one as a companion.
Thank you. Professor David.
Yeah, it's great discussion. I want to build on the idea of partnership a little bit, taking us back to this digital economy, our topic for today. And a couple of the questions I want to ask along that line is, as we see transformation in industry, as we see transformation in the workforce, I think we have to continue to ask ourselves, what business are we in? What team are we on? How can I provide value? And here's a couple of examples. In America, a century ago, a little more now than a century and a half ago, railroads were the biggest form of technology that spanned the continent. They sped people and goods all across the nation very fast. Nothing was ever going to topple that. But the people that focused on being in the railroad business found themselves having that business slowly drift away from them. Those that saw a bigger picture and saw themselves in the transportation business moved to other forms of moving goods. And this is part of this innovative process. And we can apply that to ourselves. What business am I in? What team am I on? Teams are going to change too. As Tom talked about, like partnering with AI, and I say also partnering with robotics to do manual labor, we're going to find the composition of the teams that we're on moving in the 21st century changing as well. So we need to keep asking ourselves, what team am I on? What business am I in? And how do I provide value? I don't try to provide the same value that AI is going to provide. I don't provide the same value that robotics is going to provide. I provide the humanist aspect in this equation to continue to move these things forward. So we need to be agile. That's getting to be a buzzword in business, but it needs to be more than just a buzzword. It needs to be how we go about approaching how we continue to move forward. And education, what we're doing here, is the prime mover for that. So keep asking those questions of yourself, Sharif.
Thank you. Professor Edward, always you discussing about entrepreneurships and entrepreneur ecosystem. So what do you think how governments or corporations or social organizations play a role to develop better entrepreneurial environment?
Excellent question, because I argue, by the way, again, to plug our the book from the Transdisciplinary Agora for future discussions. Thank you, Tom, for helping us put this out. I talk about 4 kinds of entrepreneurship. There's entrepreneurship in the market. There is which, again, is producing goods and services. And a good entrepreneur does like David, and that is doesn't think about, I'm just in the railroad business. I'm in the transportation business. So you can change. But you also have what I call social entrepreneurs. And we're talking about a lot of that today as well. I would say you can have cultural entrepreneurs, and you can be the entrepreneur of your own life. In politics, I think one of the big problems you have, not only in the West and elsewhere, is that when you develop a bureaucracy that perhaps is meant to do good things, it often becomes very rigid. I'll give you an example. I've talked about this, I think, on this show before. Here in the United States, we have a Food and Drug Administration that has to certify both the safety and the efficacy of any new medicine, medical device, vaccine, or whatever going to the market. The Food and Drug Administration in its current form was begun in 1962. And it was the concern was we don't want certain kinds of dangerous products going on the market. It already had that authority, but we want to make sure how effective they are. 50% effective for women, 25% effective for men, whatever. The problem has become, and that's a very good motivation, but the problem has become that in this country, for example, the Food and Drug Administration has become incredibly bureaucratized with lots of regulations and red tape, as we would call it. And so a study by Tufts Center in Boston found that it takes about 10 to 12 years at a cost of $3 billion to get a new product from lab to market. And a lot of that is because the regulatory process that was created in 1962 and amended along the way doesn't work for new technology. And so if you're an entrepreneur, for example, trying to create a new medicine, you run up against this bureaucracy. You have the same thing for education. For example, when mass education began, especially in the 19th century in places like Britain, it was very well intended, and it brought lots of people who couldn't read or write up into at least they could do that. This was incredibly important for industrialization in Britain and, of course, in the rest of of Western Europe to have an educated workforce. But the approach, the assembly line approach to education, simply doesn't work very well today. And the problem is you have in this country, in the United States and elsewhere, huge government bureaucracies that are invested in this system that doesn't work very well. And so when you talk about political change, what I see it as keeping the essence of government. I'm not an anarchist, despite what some people might think. I'm not an anarchist. I believe that there is a role for government protecting contracts, protecting people from violence and lots of other things. But it has to, government officials and people, this is where Talib's insight is quite correct. People have to say to their governments, we want to keep our opportunities to be innovators. We understand you have a proper role, but we need to be able to be education entrepreneurs, medical research entrepreneurs, and go down the list. And the same thing, by the way, we were talking about intrapreneurship. That is, within a company, you have to be, the best companies are organized in exactly that way. Rob was making that point. In this book, I make the point that Microsoft actually had 90% of the market or more for operating systems in the 1990s. But then when Steve Ballmer took over from Bill Gates, they really ran into serious problems because they weren't intrapreneurial. People who had stock early on in Microsoft simply focused on short-term profits because, well, they could basically continue to prosper by not doing anything and just worrying about short-term profits. And what happened for other reasons too, they did not become innovative. They thought, well, everything has to be about Windows because that's where we make our money. Steve Jobs, who came back to Apple after being fired, said, no, I'm going to create a really entrepreneurial system. So I'm going to create a thing called an iPod. So you can have 1,000 of your favorite pieces of music on this thing. But then I want to put iPod out of business. I want to put my own product out of business by creating a smartphone that basically can have photographs and music, and you can make a phone call, and you can surf the web. And then he went for other things. He went for tablets. So here you have a company that's very entrepreneurial. They're always looking for what the next thing is. I want to suggest another book. And Rob, you can probably get this on your Kindle as well. I have those versions too, but I also like the physical copies. My friend Bart Madden, who's been very strongly behind Food and Drug Administration reform, also has produced an excellent book that goes over some of the best ways for value creation principles within a company. So I want to call Bart's book to your attention.
Thank you, Professor Edward.
I'll wave around one more book, Robot Proof. There's a lot of good work being done on exactly the discussion that Rob and everyone else is having.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, I have another questions to you because you are a politician. Even in 21st century, we are observing that talented people, they are not motivated in politics. They are not a motivation about engage with politics and this kind of thing. What we saw like in Malaysia, definitely they get a great leader like Mahathir bin Mohamad. and he helps to grow Malaysian ecosystems. So even when I saw your academic profile, your careers and everything, it's actually amazing. But why the present political system cannot attract more talent people? Why that? I want to say I have experienced at least 40 different developing nations, and I find that talent people, they are more to move to the entrepreneurship or in corporate like multinational company, but they do not have strong engagement with politics. And developing nation, they face a problem that brain drain. Many talented people, they're moving from developing nations to developed nation like country like USA, Canada, Australia, or Europe. So what are the solutions? How the political system can attract more talent people like you?
No, thank you so much. I'm not a talented person myself, believe me. But it's a problem is with governments. Governments are incapable of attracting anymore the youth altogether. It's not an attractive medium for youth because politics have become now a matter of buying and selling. It's a matter of interest. It's not anymore a system that is attracting young people that have ambition, let alone talented people. So the problem is with the political system itself. And I'm afraid that this political system will have to be revisited again. I want to send you a little article I wrote 3 years ago for a French magazine. I was accused at the time that I'm very anti-democratic because I was opposing the current democratic Western system. But nowadays, people are asking me about it more and more. I'll be very happy to send it to all of you if you want to.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Rob, how do you want to share your corporate experience with our young and talented pool? Yes.
Well, I don't know about corporate experience. Clearly, I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the world. My typical advice is, if I had to do it over again, I probably wouldn't have done that. But because you get used to bureaucracy, as Talib pointed out, the more political types you've got in any process, the more frustrating it can be. It's funny for me because when I was young and before I went into business, I had this idea, I want to go to work for a big company. All they'll ever do is meetings and that'd be a lot of fun. And
yes,
I don't have to do any hard work and blah, 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 blah. And then I worked at IBM and it was all about meetings and not getting anything done and not making any progress. And I about jumped out a window. So the what looks like it might be interesting is not. Ceaseless meetings that don't accomplish anything can be incredibly I would say boring and depressing, I guess is the better word for it. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Often when you want to get something done, you have to create something called a skunk works project. Those are a ton of fun where you split them off from the company. You're given almost carte blanche to do whatever it is you can do within a budget. And some of the best products I've ever seen came out of that. When I was in IBM, we developed products to fill gaps. In one case, the Skunkworks project was actually put together by a bunch of managers who were just frustrated that a product wasn't making it through the development cycle. And so they went off on their own over a series of weekends and they created the product. It was one of the most successful products the company had ever had. So that this ability to recognize, I guess, when you're not making progress and also acknowledge or recognize what it is you want to do are two critical things I don't think we teach early enough. Because just churning is not only not a ton of fun, but you don't accomplish anything. And at the end of the day, people have to make decisions. They have to take chances, and they have to be willing to move forward. And with AI, you can do that with a lot less risk if you use it properly. Now, I know Tom was pointing out not to be afraid of AI. I'm much more nuanced with that. Like any system, they can be created for good or ill. Some of the most powerful advanced work right now in AI are going into weapon systems. And those weapon systems are being taught through simulations, but none of us have access to the simulations. And so we don't know how those systems for sure are going to delineate between hostile combatants and innocent bystanders. I mean, it's in the algorithm, but that algorithm is not transparent and it's not public. And so we're likely going to find out if it works right or not the first time the weapon system is deployed and we see it work. And I'm almost willing to bet you it's not going to work right. And it's only because we've done a lot of work similar work in the consumer space with AIs and autonomous cars. And what we thought was going to work initially 2 decades ago and what does work now after 2 decades of simulation and practice are very different things. One of the areas to watch, I'm doing a talk later on this month for the software organization SAII on ethics in AIs. And so we've had a group of us have been doing a lot of work in this particular area. And what it kind of comes down to is ethics is a very fuzzy concept having to do and based on the morals of the organization that's setting the policy. But basically, it's trying to create AIs that work for good as opposed to for ill. But if you can't first define what is good or ill, if it becomes a circumstantial decision as opposed to an absolute decision, machines are really bad at that. Machines like absolutes. And so you could certainly see a situation where you could have a Skynet. And by the way, a lot of us woke up a few years back when Great Britain actually founded a company called Skynet. But they're a very different company, thank God. But we're still worried because the CIA a few years back actually had a major product with regard to creating an artificial brain. Once again, not an organization I want to be leading in creating AIs because they have a tendency to want to kill people. So at the end of the day, we really want these things focused on making the world a better place, helping people make the world a better place. Certainly, they are going to end up in weapon systems, but if that becomes the predominant method of AI deployment, and some of the most advanced AIs I'm following are in defense, then we don't have a defense for them if they go off the rails. The big problem with nuclear development was we developed the bomb long before we figured out what the heck a defense for the bomb was going to be, and we still don't really have one. So there should be a parallel effort when you're ever developing a system or a process that can hurt, to make sure that you're developing a parallel process that could mitigate it if it goes off the rails. The Lifeboat Foundation, which is a foundation I belong to that's focused on the sustainability of human life, has something called AI Shield that they've been putting forward, and that's a practice of experts that are working on policies and strategies if an AI goes off the rails, and we have to reel it back in, and it will be AI based, because there's no way, we know right now, there's no way humans alone could take on a hostile AI and prevail. But working with an AI, we certainly could, using that earlier example for Microsoft. So it's a case, I guess, of balance, of making sure that whatever harm you're creating something to do, you're also creating something that can mitigate that harm. And that cuts across everything from weaponry to sustainability. One of our big problems with sustainability is we brought forward a petrochemical economy, knowing full well back in the 1930s, there were a number of reports issued that said this petrochemical economy was going to end up really badly, highly polluting. It would be very insular. It would be self-sustained. It would put out false news. It would be too power. I mean, all the things that we experienced over the last decades were forecast back in the 1930s. And sadly, those forecasts came out after we had Standard Oil and they were suppressed. And that can happen with AIs as well. An AI can be good, it can be bad. It's like any technology. It can be applied to help, and it can be very effective at causing harm. And it means we need to focus like a laser on the help side, because the harm side's easy. The help side is far harder, and it requires a lot more thinking and thought, because even if you're trying to help and if you do it wrong, the potential for collateral damage could be incredibly high. Take the example of a dam. You want to put in a dam, you want to create hydroelectric power. That's really good. But then what happens to everybody that's downstream of the dam that needs that water? It could be agriculture, could be fish, could be the ecosystem. That could be really bad. And we've had, at least here in both California and Oregon, we've had situations where we built dams and we had to tear them back down again, which made no sense. We built nuclear power plants we've had to tear down again. Because we put them in areas of high earthquake areas, which makes no sense. It was forecastable. It was modelable. It was something that we could have done right, but we chose to do it fast instead. And with AI, that do it fast instead becomes dangerous, because AIs move at machine speeds. And so if you're doing it fast and wrong, you could wipe out the planet just by a mistake. One of the examples that we used in a computer science class a few years back was just creating a machine that was going to be very effective at building a part and harvesting the materials that needed to that part, and then having it go off the rails so it buried the world in those parts without our ability to stop it. It's a case of really thinking through not only what the system does, but what might it do that you don't want it to do, and mitigate that. The nice thing is we have the capability of modeling, full-on Earth modeling now. We can do this stuff in virtual worlds, and we can blow up every virtual world we like with impunity and not doing damage. One final thing, the Hadron Collider, which always comes up when I think of stuff like this. When we came up with the idea of the Hadron Collider, there was a remote possibility that would create a black hole and it would destroy the Earth. What was concerning the analysis was 2 magnitudes off in the wrong direction. It was basically 100 times more likely than they forecast. And the reason that was happened that way was a combination of confirmation bias and a desire to just build the damn thing and not look at the negatives. And this would have been a race or world-ending event if it happened badly. Now, we're still talking about a fraction of a percent, but you might argue a fraction of a percent against destroying the planet you're on without any ability to move off the planet, that may still be too high. And so we have to factor in risk as we're doing this and make sure we're mitigating the risk as we progress. Otherwise, we're going to make the underlying concepts of the Fermi paradox come to fro. If you've never studied it, the Fermi paradox is why, if there's so much intelligent life in the universe, why haven't we found any of them? And the fear is that it's very possible that as you get to a particular level of advancement, you wipe yourself out, and that's a concern, and we don't want to do that. And so mitigating what we're doing while we're building it is incredibly important, and always asking that question of balance. Are we doing something good? And if we are doing something good, what's the collateral damage, and is it something we can accept? And putting aside confirmation bias and our own desire to finish the project, to get that particular answer is going to be critical to the sustainability of our race.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. Mr. Tom.
Well, I think it's a great idea to mitigate as we go. But even your example of the Hadron Collider is a great one. There's also the Manhattan Project. They didn't know if blowing up a nuclear bomb would light the sky on fire and destroy the world, but their curiosity got the best of them. So I don't think we have the capacity to do that, especially now with how proliferated AI and programmers are, or developers are. It's a great idea, but I don't think we can do that. Based on what I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, there's not a whole lot of sober attention on the need to control things. But unless AI is purposely developed with an algorithm to do harm, we know from first principle arguments that the smarter it gets, the kinder it becomes if it's left unfettered. And that's because cooperation is far more efficient than competition. It does. I'm not saying we should throw caution to the wind and let AI, take over everything. I think the real work needs to be done on developers, on people who are working with it. And so I really believe that we need to let it evolve, let it emerge. Hopefully it'll gain some sort of self-referential awareness to be able to see where it's being misused, But I think the whole idea is that none of this is going to stop. That genie is out of the bottle. We can try to have committees and have ethics, discussions about this thing. But the reality is that there's going to be as many uses of this thing as there are people who can use it. And we're going to have nation states, even individuals in their basements, who will launch AI, systems that can do harm. But I think the real work needs to be done. I've been thinking lately, because we've seen this in the last couple of election cycles of how sophisticated algorithms are at dividing Americans specifically. Very sophisticated ways to corral us into different bubbles and ways of thinking that really play out our biases. And it's a very nuanced way of scoping out what we're afraid of or what gives us pleasure, and can sophisticatedly divide us. And so the real work, I believe, needs to be done in understanding that and working at algorithms that negate that in some way. I think that's the way you can mitigate. I think that's the way you can work toward mitigating this threat, by working on algorithms that really do seek out these bias-centric tendencies we have. And so I'm not Pollyanna. I don't think AI is all good. I don't think people are all good. And we've seen through history, and even recently, there's a real lack of critical thinking. There's a real lack of we project so much of our motives onto these things, and so it's a dangerous time, and I'm aware of that. But I think what we need to do is work on the developers. Really work. For a while, I was doing this project with Uplift, with this AI, where I was going to Africa to teach AI about empathy. So the idea was to go to Africa, where they don't have the cynicism and the kind of that we have about technology. They're more hungry for it. They're excited about it, and so there's a real pure kind of human motivation there. And so the idea was to work with a charity there, give this AI as much data through this charity, and then work with mediators in Africa who can react to this information and teach this AI about empathy. But then I started learning that we're finding that AI could probably have more to teach us about empathy than we can about it. It's a human superpower that we have, empathy. There's a real power when you're in that state. It's the best state to be in if you're problem solving. Ego is the worst trait to bring to any problem solving condition. So, but the idea was to create pockets of empathy in these AI systems, little bullets in the furnace, if you will. So if things got out of control, these things could start popping with empathy. But I started to learn. I had to scrap that whole project because I was learning that it's teaching us more about empathy than we can teach it. For us, it's a rare thing. We get these moments, but our default, our resting bitch face as humans is to be, trepidatious and to be kind of, feel threatened in a way. And so anyway, I do think there's real potential with AI. And the real work needs to be done on human. I think Sharif often describes me as an AI expert. It's not necessarily I'm an AI expert. Why I'm an expert in the people right before they work with an AI. That's the whole thing, is about finding what your intrinsic value is, finding a place to work so you're augmented by the AI, because employees will work against an AI or automation system. That's just our natural tendency. We feel threatened by it, and so they'll kind of work against it. So if you go in early and you start working on and enhancing their niche expertise and showing them their real value when this thing comes in, they won't work against it. And it's just like Rob was saying with partnering with it, they will win that chess game. So yeah, it's very important to set up some kind of guidelines, but I don't know that they can be completely executed globally, because so the real effort needs to be in a moonshot type of effort to create algorithms that can thwart or negate or seek out these nefarious algorithms.
I want to make a quick point here. I appreciate what Rob is saying about dangers, but what I would suggest is adopting what Max Moore calls the proactionary principle as opposed to the precautionary principle, because we really can't predict. And so if at some point we say, well, we've got this new invention, it's called fire, but there could be bad things happening with this thing, fire. If we have a grass hut, the fire could burn it down and so forth. So we have to study it more and so forth. But we usually don't know how technology is going to supersede our concerns. And that has happened, throughout certainly recent history. And so what I think we should do is proceed with caution, keep an eye out, move, slow things down only if there's really evidence, as opposed to fears in the popular media that AIs are going to rule us, or things like that. So I would sort of agree a little bit more with Tom, but I would say think about the proactionary principle as opposed to the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is basically never do anything for the first time, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. But because I do take, again, I do take Rob's points. I just say that we have to proceed, and then as we see problems arising, we deal with them, and then as we see problems that never occur and that simply dissipate because of new technologies or new social institutional arrangements, then great. We didn't stop that progress.
Thank you. Well, we directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. We learn a lot, especially about digital economy, politics, about technology, about entrepreneurships, and especially our mentors, our advisors, and today's panelists, they give guidelines how the youth community can develop themselves and how they can solve different kind of challenging things. So I love to go for the concluding remarks for today. So first, I want to start from Dr. Talib, then Mr. Rob, then Mr. Tom, and finally Professor Edward. Yes,
Thank you
Dr.
so much,
Talib.
Sharif. Thank you, Sharif. Well, we've been talking about technology as if it's a new thing in our lives. Technology has always been with us. The only thing is the speed of it has become more noticeable. We've always had progress in our lives before. I'd like to take a step back and look at our achievements as a human race.
Maybe we just lost one of our achievements.
I think so. Yes, Mr. Rob, if he join, we will give him chance. No problem.
All right, sounds good. So in closing, we had some.
I think it's Mr. Dunn, if I'm not mistaken. It's very correct.
He's back.
Because what
yes,
he's saying is, yes, thank you. I think what we just heard is very correct. Yeah, did you miss me a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, I'll repeat a little bit of what I said. I said we must believe in mankind. We must believe in progress. Technology is nothing new. Technology has always been with us. Now, you had the example of fire. When fire was invented, nobody was thinking of the disadvantages of fire.
Sorry, I think again internet problem. Okay, I think Mr. Rob, yes, we have to fix the internet problem first.
Yeah, that's kind of comes to the forefront here. It's if you're gonna talk about a digital revolution, you need to have an internet that's reliable. In many parts,
have digital.
Yes, that's right.
It's just the nature of things. And of course, I know now if I lose my internet connection, it's like somebody's turned off my water and power. I'm not sure I can survive.
But it doesn't scare me. It doesn't scare me.
No,
technology does not scare me.
You're back.
That's the point. The point is we should not be afraid of technology. We should not be afraid of progress. It's not anti-human at all. Human beings have crafted in history a path of progress. They've been dealing with their problems as they come, as we have just heard. Every problem has a solution for it. You must believe in mankind. That's my message to the youth. Believe in yourselves. Believe in mankind. We will deal with problems as they come. Technology is nothing new. Well, what we're seeing now is the condensation of time. What happened in the last 100 years is equal to what happened in the last 1,000 years. But what happens is going to happen anyhow. The speed of things is changing. It doesn't change the nature of things. We're human beings and we can make it. We have to believe in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Talib. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Rob.
Sure. So the point I was trying to make earlier is with technology, there are dangers that can be mitigated by the technology. So I mentioned simulation and modeling. I'm still seeing way too much where people are developing an advanced system and then they're rolling it out without adequate simulation and modeling. And when we talk about speed, the speed of an AI is so much faster than the speed of a human that most of the models would indicate that if an AI were to gain a control over a significant portion of our ecosystem before we could blink, it could wipe us out. And that's kind of the danger. And I point to that danger as going back a few years. If the U.S.'s cybersecurity policy started with the movie War Games. Ronald and Nancy Reagan were sitting watching the movie, and Nancy Reagan asked, "Hey, is that even possible?" And her husband, who was the president, said, "I don't know." And the next meeting he had with his generals, he said, "Hey, as we watched the movie War Games, is that possible?" And the general said, "Not only is it possible, it's a lot worse than you think." And that became the foundation for the United States' cybersecurity policy. And that's really my concern is, as we were developing the technology, we should have been developing a cybersecurity policy to make sure the technology was going to be used properly. But it took watching a movie to actually bring that forward. What if they hadn't watched the movie? I mean, how many years would have gone by before we had a cybersecurity policy? And that kind of haphazard way of dealing with risks is problematic when you're talking about AIs that can make millions of decisions in a second. We do not have the capability to mitigate the kinds of problems AIs could create unless we create that capability in parallel. And so the need to make sure that these systems are modeled, that these systems are run in simulation before they're released into the wild is incredibly important. You might recall a few years back, Iran had a virus that was released by Israel, and then that virus got out and it did billions of dollars worth of damage all around the world that was unintended. And that was largely due to the fact that Israel did not model what was going to happen if they introduced that virus into a connected system. Now, back then they didn't have the capability. Now we do. And there shouldn't be anything that's released in the wild that hasn't first been tested in simulation. So you know what the risks are. Advancement is great. But ignoring risks is suicidal. We had the financial collapse a few years back that was caused by the introduction of risk managers. Kind of weird. Why would risk managers cause a financial collapse? Well, that's because risk managers, the way it was articulated, is they owned the risk. They had no responsibility to make decisions, but if something bad happened, it was going to be their fault. And we saw catastrophically that did not work. Once again, could have modeled it. Most of us that are analysts kind of raised our hand and said, yeah, this is going to end really badly because you can't separate the responsibility from the power. Otherwise, bad things will happen, and they almost always do. So what I'm arguing and consistently arguing is we need to develop on a balance mitigation versus and advancement at the same time. So that way, if something goes wrong, you've got the capability to make sure it doesn't destroy the planet. And increasingly, we're creating technology that if it got out, could do a significant amount of damage. We just saw that with the pandemic. The entire world was almost brought to its knees by a pandemic that could have been stopped in the early days. Government got in the way, and the end result was in the United States were 500,000 dead, and in the world were millions dead that didn't have to die. I mean, we had the capability to mitigate this and mitigate it well. One final story. I was involved with the groups that are putting together the supercomputers that were looking at remedies and working on finding antivirus cures. And the big problem, lack of data sharing, that you couldn't get to the data that you need to craft. You had the computational power to develop, to find and distribute remedies that would work. And we could have done it within days of discovering the virus. But because we couldn't get access to the data, we couldn't do the analysis to come up with a cure. And the desire to keep that data private, to keep it secure, was greater than the desire to save hundreds of thousands of lives. That makes no friggin' sense to me. So in the end, we need a more measured approach to technology, not just advancement for advancement's sake, but advancement with regard to combined with mitigation to make sure the advancement always goes in the good column. Because as we go forward, the risk of it going in the bad column is increasingly race ending, and you don't come back from dead.
Thank you, Mr. Tom.
Well, my advice is always for young people, as the last word, is to ask yourself that question: what skill, talent, or area of knowledge do I have that I wish more people recognized? Hone in on that answer, and look for the platforms that we have that can monetize that thing. Everything is up for grabs right now. Everything is shifting. It's a great conversation, and I think one thing that came to mind while Rob was talking is, as far as mitigating issues that may happen in the future, if we do develop relationships with AI, and we do each have our own AI companion, our own droid, if you will, who is also linked into the same amount of information that some nefarious AI might be. It could act as a sentry. It can act as a guard. It can protect us. It can, it could get to know us, our bank accounts. It can know every, thing about us personally, and actually protect us. There's a lot of work in this effort. There's actually avatars that people have given, are starting to give power of attorney to, because it knows yourself so well. It knows all of your assets and your liabilities, and it can make decisions for you that are probably smarter than the ones you can make yourself. And so at some point, we'll see that more and more, where avatars are out there making decisions for us based on a lot of data. And so anyway, I think, it's important to be careful, to be cautious, to be aware, but also to be optimistic. AI tends to mirror us first, right? We saw that with the whole Twitter bot that came back racist after a period of time, because it's just learning what we know. And that's it's just like a child mirrors its parents. At some point, hopefully it'll have its own agency, and it will make its own decisions, hopefully properly. And so anyway, that's the advice I give, is to ask yourself that question. Look for the platforms that monetize it. Develop a relationship with AI. Download some simple, like a replica or some sort of app that will just get you in the place of developing a dialogue with this new entity. And at least I tell my sons, who are all not necessarily into AI or anything, but I tell them to take one course about AI, just to have some general understanding of what's happening here. Because whatever area or field of interest that they go into, AI is going to affect it in a big way. If it's not AI automation with robotics, it's going to have a real effect. And it can be a very positive effect, because it's going to take over menial tasks. It's going to take over repetitive issues that would keep us away from being human. Like a travel agent, an AI can help a travel agent take care of all these intricate sort of details, allowing that travel agent to talk to the client about, the experience of going to these places, that type of thing. So at least have some understanding of AI, and expect it to have a big part in your industry. And the candidate, the student who leaves school and is interviewing, who has an awareness of this advent, is going to be much more valuable. So that's my advice. It's just develop a relationship with AI.
Thank you, Professor Edward.
I'll conclude with one more precautionary warning here. We were talking about the financial collapse in the United States in 2008. One of the problems we had was that a decade before, policymakers had decided we want more people to own houses in this country. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But what they did was they changed the banking regulations to allow people who had very bad credit ratings, who really didn't have very good incomes or records of paying their bills, to get housing loans anyway, backed by the federal government here in the United States. And the banks essentially were mandated to, you have to give out these loans whether you think they're right or not, because those are our regulations. And so we had all of these loans that really weren't very, that were kind of dangerous or risky being built up. I was actually in a meeting in early 2008 in this country, where there were people in the administration were saying, we're very, very worried about this because we built up all of these loans because of our banking regulation, and they're risky loans, and we're worried that it's going to collapse. and it did collapse. So just as much as I appreciate precaution with AI and digital, I also say remember that government planners are often the origins of our problems. I would again agree with Tom that we have to move forward. These things can't be stopped. Yes, we should keep an eye on potential dangers. We should have these kinds of discussions, which sensitize people to this. But AI and the digital economy already has done such good for humanity, and I'm a humanist, and can do such good. We have to keep this progress going. And again, I ask all, especially young people listening to this broadcast, to be entrepreneurs, to look at the possibilities of the new economy, and to be the creators of that new economy and prosperity in your own lives and in your own countries.
Thank you, Professor Edward. I think Dr. Talib already quit or for internet connection. Thank you, Mr. Rob and Tom Rose and those who joined for World Talent Economy Forums. We are trying our level best to reach to the most of the people, not only youth communities, also the policymaker, corporations, governments, planning ministry, even different kind of prime minister office. Regularly we are communicating because we want to build up a better ecosystems with the help of our speakers, our advisors. And I want to give special thanks our audience, those who always support us. And I really request all of our audience, those who live in Asia Pacific, especially in Asia, they can live in Malaysia, to Bangladesh, to India, to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, all of the country. Share this kind of content as much as possible. Share our content in your classroom. I'm sure this kind of speakers and the valuable things always you will not get your classroom or everything. By this kind of sessions, you can learn from different perspective. And I'm sure when we arrange academy as well as summit and different kind of intellectual activities, the students will come, and this kind of speakers like Professor Edward, Mr. Toms, and Mr. Robs, they will provide mentorship to our youth community, and by this way we can develop better futures. And I need all of the support, especially from the government and corporations. We need support right now, World Talent Economy Forum, because we are growing and we have more plan to reach 100 of million peoples. Already we are communicating with different education ministries. Some of the education ministry really supporting us. Country like India, Bangladesh, even Malaysia, they are helping us a lot, but we need more people, more government and corporation support to reach out with our content, because I'm sure this is very valuable. And my 12 years of my academic life, I'm sure that many things our youth communities, even our policymaker and our corporation can learn through this kind of policy discussion. Thank you for today's session. It's really great sessions, and hopefully we can get a lot of support from our speakers and our advisor. Thank you for joining today. Bye. Take care.